Okay, we're now recording the webinar, and as I was just saying, lots of content for you today, so stick with it and remember that you can always access the recording later and you'll receive instructions on how to do that. What I intend to cover today is to look at some traditional performance reviews, and we will look at actual reviews so that you can see what other people are doing, perhaps compare what you're doing. Because you're probably here because you're not 100% happy with what you are doing, we'll also look at some alternative approaches. And finally, of course, we'll look at rewards and how rewards can be structured and the alternatives in terms of how you reward people. I'm very happy to take questions when we get to the end of the webinar, and at that stage I'll switch off the recording and you can go for your life with questions. So please take note of any questions that arise as we're going through so that when we get to that point you'll have your questions ready for me and we can share them with the rest of the group. Do you remember when you registered? I had a question there. What one thing would you really like to know about effective performance appraisals and rewards? Thank you to those who responded. I really appreciate it because that's helped me structure what we're doing today. So actually probably one of the earliest responses I got was from someone who said they wanted to know how to run an effective system for a small business without a lot of time, effort and therefore money. I expect that probably covers most of the people listening today, and that's what I'm going to be showing you. So before we get into performance management in detail, let's just take a quick look at some of the background to why we do it. So obviously the main reason for doing it is so that the staff in the business are working towards the goals of the business. The second part of that is ensuring that employees understand their goals and how they link in with the overall business objectives. And finally, we want to fairly evaluate how employees are performing and also to get a feel for their development needs. There are also some less theoretical reasons, if you like, for doing performance reviews, particularly if you're in financial services industry. That first quote comes from the Business Health White Paper, and those of you in financial planning will be familiar with Business Health collects a lot of data to do with financial planning practices. And I think the impact of the performance management system on profits are a good enough reason as any to introduce them or to improve what you're already doing. And finally, for financial services businesses, RG 104 actually requires that you will monitor and supervise staff and includes in that guideline performance management. So given that we need to do it, what are some of the ground rules? Well, probably the toughest decision is how much you're going to do, how much analysis do you want to do, and how often will you do it. I would point out that the more frequently you do performance reviews, the less onerous they'll be and the faster you'll get to the results that you're hoping for. Obviously you want to be prepared for your meeting, and that may include collecting some data, reviewing position description and having a good think about how the person's performing. It may also mean talking to other stakeholders. Obviously when you get to that time, you schedule a time and stick to it. I wish I could have that imprinted on the forehead of one particular client of mine who's been promising to do them for about 3 months now. But there you go. Schedule a time and stick to it, a time when there are no interruptions and distractions. This is high-level mental work. You really do need to concentrate. Obviously part of it, and a big part of it, is listening to the staff member and what they have to say about the performance. And as I've said, you need to take the time to do that. And finally, you want to record what's been discussed in the interview as simply as possible, so that you have something that you can stick to monitor as you go through. So the purpose really behind any sort of performance management system is to have a shared and documented understanding of the things that need to be done, how they're going to be measured, and what the goals are that you're working towards, and then to use that as your basis for regular ongoing feedback. Okay, so that's all our background. Let's move on now to the traditional performance review. Now, I've spent many years, probably more than I can care to think about, looking at performance reviews and how they're done in all sorts of different types of organisations. Because most of the people on the call today are from a financial background, I've decided to pull out a couple of examples that I know are used in financial services businesses. So let's take a look. This is one example. So as we go through these, you might pick up ideas for things that you would like to change about the one that you're using at the moment, or you might also pick up ideas of things you maybe don't want to do. So let's have a look at this nice, simple, compared to many others that I've seen, although it's 6 pages long, it's actually reasonably straightforward. So you can see this review has 5 different sections in it. There's the performance review, they look at behavioural competencies, there's an overall rating, setting objectives for the next time, and a development plan. So these are agreed, obviously, and so for the performance review against the key objectives, you're rating somebody against a 4-point scale, and you can see what the points are there. Then the behavioural competencies, another 4-point scale, this time from A to D. I find this somewhat confusing because then when you go to give the overall rating, it has to be a combination of those two. And obviously, it's worth pointing out there that it mentions in light of any mitigating factors. And whenever you're considering a performance appraisal and someone's achievement against objectives, that's obviously key to take in any mitigating factors. So at the end of this, or almost the end of this form, details of the reasons for your ratings, objectives for the next review period, and as we can see, this is an insurance industry form, so a personal development plan that looks at different development areas, what activities might address those areas, and then agrees on time frames, and that will then go into the organisation's training plan. Okay, let's take a look at another option. And this is quite different from the previous one and slightly more complex in that we have 5 tiers of performance. And as you can see here, the person is evaluated on core competencies, key competencies, it has both. And these are the ratings across the top, the 1 to 5 tier ratings that are on that page. And the manager and the employee rate themselves, rate the employee in terms of all of those key competencies. So there's the core competencies for the organisation, there's the key accountabilities to do with the particular role, and then there's development objectives. And then the reviewer is asked to give a summary, to give an overall score. So similar to the previous one, an overall score that will determine rewards basically. So, and space for the employee and manager comments. One final form, which is really just a further iteration and a more detailed example of the one that we just looked at. What is different about this one is that it actually gives an overview of the incentive scheme structure right up front. Now what I love about that is that staff members will know in advance what the rewards are, or otherwise, of their scores and their achievements. So we can see that depending on your rating, so the same 5 ratings that we were talking about before, you will actually gain a different percentage of total salary as a bonus or incentive. This is reasonably complex, but at least it's put there, it's upfront, it's transparent. Okay, so moving on then to the actual ratings. So you can see, similar to before, you have 5 different levels: manager, employee, rating, and the key accountabilities, goals or objectives. So on this side there, accountabilities to do with the position, the individual accountabilities and the overall performance objectives. Finally, just employee and manager comments. What I just wanted to point out about this, because it really demonstrates the difficulty with coming up with reward and incentive schemes, which is probably part of the reason why you're here. If we look at, say, the core position accountabilities, they're each given a rating of 1 to 5, and as a maximum, you can achieve a 1% of total salary bonus per competency. So a rating 3, you'll get 0.25, 4 you have 0.5%, 5 you get 1%. If we look at the actual competencies, I can imagine that there may be some employees who will think, okay, so if I exceed, consistently exceed the required standard in just one competency, I will get 1% of total salary as an increase. I'll get the maximum. So rather than consistently meeting the required standard in 3 of these, they may choose, for example, accountability number 3 and to exceed it. Now, I'm not saying that all employees are going to be that manipulative, but that's always something that you have to keep in account. If we look at the individual objectives too, I would suggest that number 1 is very easily exceeded, and it's possible that some employees would choose to focus on that because it's easy. So part of setting your objectives in a scheme such as this requires you to actually look at the balance between how important the different goals are. Okay, so as part of my research, and I hope you found looking at those gave you some ideas about your own, and I'm happy to discuss anything about them in detail later on. Okay, I did a bit of research, as I said, and one of the things I came across was this rather scary fact for all of us who've put many hours and blood, sweat and tears into developing performance management systems. So just something to be aware of. So if that is the case, and for 9 out of 10 employees they're not actually improving their performance because there's a performance management system in place, what's going wrong? Why are most of them a waste of time? Well, based on my experience, I would have to say that one of the reasons is that we tend to build them too complex and time-consuming. And really we're setting ourselves up for failure when we do that. The second thing is that by not adding value. So it is quite often the case that partly due to the complexity, that the information that we get out of a performance review isn't really something that we can use day by day in managing staff. Now these 2 points I just wanted to reiterate in terms of designing or evaluating your own system is that you want, if you're adding something to a system or you're changing a system, you really want to look at how much more complex is it making it, how much more value is it adding. If it is going to make it so much more complex but not adding value, then there's no point. Scrap it, I would say. Alternatively, if you can add value without adding complexity, then go right ahead. Another reason why many are a waste of time is that they ignore the science. There is a lot of research on goal setting, as you can imagine, and performance management, and we'll be looking at what that means in a minute. Another problem is that some systems lack transparency and accountability, and you may have experienced this yourselves. And then the final, and probably biggest, is it's just not a priority. You've got the day-to-day business to run, and things come in that are much more urgent and need to be addressed immediately. So if you've got something that's complex, hard to do and takes a lot of time, you're more than likely to put that to the bottom of your list. So does any of that sound familiar, perhaps? So in a minute we're going to talk about how you might evaluate your current system. So this addresses one of the other questions that I received in response to the registration question, which is how can you make them effective rather than procedural? So let's take a look at how to do that. I've called this slide back to basics, and the most basic is to understand what your business objectives are. What is it that the business is aiming to do? Your strategic plan, whatever. Then what do you want to achieve with this process? What impact do you expect in terms of employee engagement and productivity from your performance management process? Hopefully a very positive impact. And finally, how can you manage performance better with less effort? I think if you keep those four things in mind, and finally, another finally, number 5, which isn't on the slide, to ask yourself about the system that you're using now is, are you getting results? Is it delivering what you think it should? So another way of looking at that in one question is really, what is the least amount of information you need from your performance appraisals to help you make the right decisions? I think it's very easy for us to keep collecting data, hoping that we'll have more and better and more reliable data before we actually make a decision. And coming from a scientific background, I think I'm probably more guilty of this than most. The eye-opener for me was the book Blink by Malcolm Gladwell, which actually investigates research into the quality of decisions relative to the amount of data. And there's some surprising things there. I guess my survey that I sent out early in the year, the one-question survey to determine what webinars I should run, was a perfect example of this. I certainly got lots of information from one question, and this webinar is a result of that. Okay, time to look at some alternatives to the traditional system. Of course, one alternative that I would always put forward is hiring the best and assuming that they'll perform, and therefore the performance management system becomes a lot less important in the whole scheme of things. And this is because, based on enjoyment performance theory, we say that if you employ someone who enjoys doing the work that you're giving them, they get plenty of opportunity to do that work. Through that opportunity and repetition, they'll improve, they'll get positive feedback, they'll continue to enjoy. Great, easy, and ideal. However, none of us really live in an ideal world. We live in the real world, and although I believe we should aim towards this, there are other questions. One which I received just recently was, how do you tie performance to accountability without creating a resistant culture? Great question. A lot has to do with how you manage the system and how you reward, and also what sort of culture you're actually trying to create. Now, getting back to our ideal world, it would be great if we could structure work so that it provides all these things. Some of you may have seen the video that I sent a link to a couple of weeks ago, where Daniel Pink talks about drive and what really motivates people. So obviously we like to be treated like people, and in our roles we like to have autonomy, mastery and purpose. However, I'm realistic enough to know that in many businesses there are roles where you can't achieve this, and we also need to have documentation to prove that we've made objective steps in measuring performance. So as managers, I think it's great to keep these things in mind, but now we're going to get back more to the practical level. What I'd like you to consider the possibility of today is a one-page performance review. So my ideal one-page performance review would consist of a few challenging goals. So they're all important. The more goals that you have, the less important each goal becomes. For example, if you have 5 goals, then each goal is only contributing 20% to your achievement. So the ideal is around 3 and 4 to keep it as simple as possible. Speaking of simple, you want to keep the goals themselves excuse me, simple. I'm sure you're all familiar with SMART goals: specific, measurable, achievable, realistic and time-framed. If we cut that down even further and assume that we're not going to set goals that aren't achievable or realistic, and being specific is actually talking about being time-framed, then we should think of goals as being specific, important both to the organisation and to the individual, and measurable. And I should just point out that in our next webinar on the 15th of December, we'll be talking about goal setting in more detail. Something that I'm suggesting that might go against what we've thought about and discussed quite a bit in terms of engagement and empowerment is that it's the manager who sets the goals. This is because the research has shown that people are equally motivated by goals that are set by themselves or by their manager, provided they understand the goal. So it's the manager's task to set the goal, but also to explain the rationale behind it so that it is meaningful for the staff member. And then your one-page performance review should be a basis for frequent feedback. And as I said earlier, the more frequent, the faster you're going to get results, and it just allows for fine-tuning as you go along. So that's our core, and I'll show you a bit later what that might look like. There are then some optional things that you might care to add to your performance review. Behavioural goals, which would be included in your maximum of 5 goals. So you might have 3 performance goals and 2 behavioural goals, for example, or even only 1 behavioural goal. And these are probably things usually that are tied to the organisation's values. So it may be something like we value others' input, or about how you treat your clients. Or it could be individual behaviours that you're attempting to change. Forced rankings are also optional and probably not all that relevant to the size of business that I'm talking to today. If you would like more information about what that means and why you should or shouldn't use it, please don't hesitate to get in touch. Development plans, in most cases, probably a good idea, and this could be added as an extra page. So I'm sorry, I didn't really lie about 1 page, but if you want to add the optional extras, it might be a little longer. And another one of the optional extras is the salary review. Now that can be added if you want to, and you want to make it more meaningful for your employees so that they can see that there's a direct link between performance and rewards. But in many situations you might not wish to do that, and we'll be talking about the pros and cons of that in a minute. There's certain things that my one-page performance review wouldn't include. One of those is numerical ratings. So we actually saw numerical ratings on those traditional ones we looked at, didn't we? I'm saying we don't need numerical ratings, nor do we need labels such as star performer or reliable staff member or anything like that. The reason we don't need those is because they just add to complexity without adding a great deal of value. The same goes for self-assessment. Now, most traditional, well, at least in the last 10 years, performance reviews include, in fact, require self-assessment. But the research shows that this could actually be a bit of a waste of time and a demotivator because that is the least accurate type of assessment, and it doesn't actually matter. What matters is how you assess their performance in terms of achieving the organisational goals. Just to give you one example of where self-assessment could be a bit of a nightmare, one organisation I was reviewing their performance review forms, and they had on each goal and each competency, people had to rank themselves from 1 to 10. Now, I think you can imagine what a high percentage of the staff were around the 9 point. That can cause further problems as you then give them a bit of a reality check, and it's a bit of a situation of a dented pride because they may have truly believed they were 9. So again, to reduce complexity, skip the self-assessment. And finally, negotiated goals, where the employee tells you what they think their goals should be. We talked earlier about why the manager, it's equally valid for the manager to set and explain the goals. So the book that this information that I've really summarised here is called One Page Talent Management by Mark Efron and Miriam Ord. And I just wanted to give that recognition as a source. So here's my example of a one-page performance review. It probably looks more simple than it should, but this is what I think it would look like. So in this case, we've just, for sake of space, I've said 3 goals. Okay, so goal 1, let's say it's for a financial planner. We might say the goal is to bring new business into the practice. The metric might be X amount of dollars by end of July, or being quite specific about what's expected, and then you would report the results there below. Same situation, I'm sure you can think of many examples of goals, but basically your goal talks about in general what you expect. Metric is exactly how you're going to measure it, and the results should be quite easy to report because you know exactly what the goal and the metric are. I would think that doing that for 3 goals, considering you've already got the goal and the metric from your previous review, presumably, and you're only recording and reporting the results, that should probably take 20-30 minutes maximum for each staff member. And then for the overall result, I'm thinking you would be saying something like exceeds expectations, only met 1 goal. So it's actually going to have some meaning rather than calling them a 1A or ranking them as 90% achieved. To be really clear about how their performance was against the goals, put some words around it. So as I've said, that should take a lot less time. I hope you agree. I know when I first thought about this, it's a bit scary looking, so how do we bring down what it is to 3 goals, 4 goals, 5 goals, when we're used to probably having a whole list of objectives. And my response to that is really you need to keep in mind that what gets measured gets done. And if you're restricted to these small number of goals, you're only going to actually report on the things that are important, which saves everyone a lot of time. Okay, so another response to my question was measuring performance against goals and rewarding appropriately. So I think we've talked about how we do the measures. Now it's time to move on to rewards. So let's look, before actually we go into that detail, I just wanted to put this quote here because I came across it when I was doing the research, and I actually thought it was great. It shows the power of expectation and how rewarding behaviour will change the outlook of the person. Okay, but let's get a bit more scientific about this. In preparation for this webinar, I decided to have a little mini poll and ask people, if you could choose your own rewards for good performance at work, what would you choose? And these were the options. A financial bonus or pay rise, 36% thought that would be their reward of choice. Access to training, development and coaching, I actually expected to be higher than 9%. Maybe I didn't have too many Gen Ys in there. A chance to work on more interesting projects, again 9%. More flexible working hours was quite important to people, as was more autonomy in day-to-day decisions. So I think it's interesting to look at the spread there, and that, you know, obviously there's quite a range of things that different people will think are important. So if we first take the idea of a financial bonus or pay rise, let's look at the different types of bonus. The most obvious, of course, is the individual bonus, and that can only really be awarded if the individual has direct control over the outcome. So do they really have full control over what their goal, over achieving the goal that's set for them? Team bonuses are more appropriate when it takes a team to reach a goal. And then you might have organisation-wide that are based on the organisational objectives. Whatever you do, ideally it needs to be agreed in advance rather than just giving discretionary bonuses. And one example I've got for you here is just an organisation-wide one, but it's only a very small organisation. Is one of my clients who has decided this is what his annual revenue will be and divided that into quarters, and then at the end of each quarter, if he meets or exceeds budget, his team will all get a preset bonus. So it's quite clear, quite simple, and really depends on the organisation as a whole achieving their objectives, at least in terms of revenue. Another question. How can the scheme be seen as not related to remuneration? This is a great question and really got me thinking, so thanks for that. I'd like you to think about what the rewards are actually determined by. So whether we're talking about pay rises or whether we're talking about bonuses, it's not just performance. Performance is only one aspect of that. You also need to look at the organisation's capacity to pay and where you sit relative to market salary rates. This is all information that you need to take on board before deciding on rewards or bonuses. And staff need to be aware of that too. So another thing you can do is actually separate the performance review from the salary review and hold them at different times of the year. So one might be linked to the calendar year, one to the financial year. So you're breaking that connection and tension in the staff member's brain. That's another way of separating them in terms of linkages. Just getting back to making staff aware of the organisation's capacity to pay, that's actually okay to share that information if times are tough, But don't be too negative. You don't want people thinking that they should abandon ship before it sinks. But certainly you can take them into your confidence if that's the real reason why you're not paying. If you are thrilled with their performance, then please let them know. As to whether you should pay bonuses or increase salary, in volatile conditions, and I would say what we have now are pretty volatile conditions, you're really much better off offering a bonus, because that's going to be much easier to wind back than a pay increase. So just keep that in mind in terms of rewards. So as you've probably guessed from some of the stuff earlier, it really helps if you can choose rewards that suit what motivates the individual staff member. Now that's not going to be easy. However, I've got a few tips for you. One of the things I've done is pulled together some ideas about 4 different types of staff and the rewards that are relevant to them. And then we'll also look at how using an assessment like Harrison assessments can help you pick out what the characteristics are of an individual that will help you decide on rewards that might be motivating to them. So first of all, let's look at some of the types, if you like. I hate to say types, but you will know in your business, if you think about it, who is motivated by achievement and meaningful work. So that's the sort of person who goes above and beyond, turns up for work early and stays late and really enjoys their projects. So just have a think for a moment and maybe write down who that is in your business. So now that you have an idea of who that is, these are some of the things that are really going to keep that person motivated. So they already enjoy what they do, so give them more of what they enjoy. And keep in mind that promotion isn't necessarily a motivator for everybody. So our second type of motivator is for people who really appreciate promotion, so different from the previous one, and or self-development. So they're the sort of person really getting into training, looking to progress in the organisation, and like a lot of feedback. Any ideas who that might be for you? Write it down. Because now we can look at how you might reward them. They're the people who probably get the most out of a regular feedback from performance appraisals. They're probably really going to appreciate some sort of bonus or even a certificate to say what a great job they're doing. Training they'll love, and obviously the opportunities to develop and be promoted within the organisation. So our type 3 is a person who's motivated by power and or responsibility, and yes, you probably don't want too many of them in your business. However, if you do have somebody who likes to take on the extra work and really has an opinion and likes to share it, then why not reward them by giving the opportunity to do extra work and maybe even to lead a small team, and really asking them for their input. The more you can ask this person for input, the more motivated they will be. Okay, the fourth and final are those staff who works as much about the social aspect of work as it is the work. They like to be together in a team. They really appreciate being told they're given a good job, and they like to be popular. Do you have anyone like that in your business? You probably do. So how are we going to reward this person? Give them opportunities for teamwork, obviously. Really encourage the social side of work and make sure that they are getting plenty of feedback and probably public recognition for what they do. So I hope those 4 different types have given you some ideas of different ways for rewarding people beyond the standard bonus or incentive scheme. However, there's danger ahead. If I could emphasize one thing in this talk, it's about the danger of making assumptions about people and going for a one-size-fits-all scheme, because one size doesn't fit all, and this is why. This is results of a survey where people were asked about what motivates them at work. When asked if making a contribution to society was important, 53% said yes, 47% said no. So if you were going to introduce a scheme that allowed everyone to do charity work one day a month, for example, I'm not sure that that would really work for almost half your population in the workplace. The same thing happened with highly competitive management. Some were motivated, others not, and well-established policies and procedures, which from an HR perspective, of course, I always say is important. Unfortunately, 42% really couldn't give a damn. So rather than making assumptions about what is going to be suitable as a reward for people, it's really important to find out what motivates them as individuals. And so just one example of how you can find this information is through the Harrison assessment. And this is an excerpt from a report that's called the Traits and Definitions Report. And I just wanted to point out a few things very briefly that you can find out from these reports. Cause motivated, for example, we were just talking about making a contribution to society. So for this staff member, that one day a month to do charity work would actually be quite highly valued because they're motivated to do that. This person also wants to lead, up the top there, 9.7. So if you could put them in a position of leading others, that would be very motivational to this person. In addition, they want challenge. So anything new that comes along and interesting projects are things that you could throw their way and they would love it. You might also notice too that they are actually quite self-motivated. So provided they have the opportunity to take initiative and have some challenges and they can be enthusiastic about what the organisation is trying to achieve, then they will actually be quite self-motivated. So if you're interested in finding out more about what the assessments can do, you can always have a free trial. Either give me a call or visit our website where you can sign up there for a free trial. Anytime, be happy to help. One last question from the registration question. Thanks for this one. Which companies do it well? Well, I wish I knew the answer to that one. It should be simple. We do see various organisations winning awards from time to time about how they do their performance management. But of course, a lot of that depends on how good they are at writing submissions. And if you know or you believe your company does it well, or you know of another one that does, then please get in touch and let me know. Just one final thing I wanted to remind you about was the Team Health Check, which is an anonymous online survey which many of our clients have tried and find really helps them identify the barriers to peak performance. So this is really looking at your performance management from a different angle. So certain things that might come up in that can then help you fine-tune what you're doing in terms of your performance management. Now, you know, I believe that there's no point in you having sat through this webinar, listened and viewed this information without actually taking some action on it. So I hope you've got some new ideas today, and now it's time for you to commit to doing one. And all I can say is give it a go. You can always go back to what you're doing now, but if you can commit to doing one thing in the next week that's going to make your performance and review process more effective and your rewards more effective, then I hope you'll write it down now, and even more so I hope you'll let me know so that I can keep you accountable. So just a reminder that Our next webinar will be on the 15th of December, and the topic for that is a flying start to 2011, and I hope you'll all be able to join me then.